After months of demonstrations, reports suggest that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may withdraw his controversial judicial overhaul bill after all. As per reports, the Prime Minister has been under pressure from all quarters, especially after his extreme step of sacking his own defense minister. On Sunday, Israel Defense Minister Yoav Gallant had given a statement calling for a halt to the process of passing the judicial overhaul plan. Now, under pressure from widespread protests, cracks had already started emerging within the ruling coalition since Friday. Israel's economy minister and its culture and sports minister had called the current situation untenable and have said that if Netanyahu decides to stop the legislation, then he should be backed. But the Netanyahu-led government has won the confidence of the House. It survived two non-confidence motions filed by the opposition. Earlier in the day, Israel's President Isaac Herzog urged the government to call a halt to the planned legislation, which has ignited some of the biggest nationwide demonstrations in Israel's history. Several sectors across Israel are on strike. More than 20 mayors across the country are on hunger strike. Israel's key airport, Ben Gurion, in Tel Aviv, announced immediate halt to all takeoffs. However, they resumed a few hours later. Now, workers at Israel's largest port, Haifa port, are also on strike. Universities have announced strikes, shopping malls are closed, even McDonald's is closing all its restaurants across Israel. The judicial overhaul, which would give the executive control over appointing judges to the Supreme Court, allow the government to override court rulings on the basis of simple parliamentary majority, and has drawn massive protests for weeks now. For the latest developments, we are joined by our correspondent Jody Cohen from Ra'anana, Israel. Welcome, Jody. Jody, what more can we expect today by the way of the protests? They're expanding by the hour.
Right, so people have been taking to the streets across the country since Sunday evening until 3 o'clock in the morning today. Continuing today, protesters have re-blocked the Ayalon Highway, which is a major highway in Tel Aviv. Now, the Histadrut, that's the largest labor trade union, they've called a general strike, and hospitals have announced that they will participate in the strike. The airport has already started to shut down flights. Schools have announced that they'll participate, and many of the local authorities too. Even the embassies around the world have announced that they will be participating in this general strike. There's a hunger strike outside Netanyahu's house. We've seen mass protests before in Israel. Israel's known to be a vibrant democracy with lots of protesting. Most notably, there were protests around the Oslo Accords, around the disengagement from Gaza, and against the cost of living. But we've never seen anything like this before. Protesters are now gathering in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, here in Ra'anana. There's a unity tent going on in Jerusalem. And Simcha Rothman, the chair of the Constitution Committee, has called on supporters of judicial reform to go out this evening and take to the streets themselves. And that's because Prime Minister Netanyahu is thought possibly to be considering a freeze to the judicial reforms.
Jody, we can see the Israel flags behind you and protests still going on. Next question, will Netanyahu pause the protests? And could this even bring down the coalition?
So I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is being urged to see how many people will go out tonight in support of the judicial reforms. Trade Minister Nir Barkat has called on the coalition to support Netanyahu if he decides to call for a freeze. Others are likely to support it as well, not because they don't support judicial reform, but for the sake of unity. Justice Minister Levin, most notably, has also said that he will support whatever Netanyahu decides. But National Security Minister Ben Gvir reportedly might leave the coalition if there is a freeze. There's also talk that he might support it from the outside. Protesters are not taking anything for granted. There have been protests all day outside the houses of the influential Likud members of parliament, I should say, who might, it's thought, vote potentially against the judicial reforms if they are taken forward to the next step, which is in the plenum of the parliament. So it remains to be seen. We've been waiting all day as well for a potential statement from Netanyahu. That looks like it has been put off potentially until after the protest this evening.
Thank you for all those updates, Jody.
Thank you.